I would like to refer to the relevant theoretic notion of meta-representation once more, this time in the interpretation of conditional sentences. This lecture is in a way similar to the previous one because we would like to present a unitary interpretation of conditional sentences based on the concept of meta-representation. So if you compare these lectures, I mean echoic questions, metalinguistic negation and conditional sentences, you will notice more or less the same line of argumentation. So let's start from approaches to the logical operator if. So one approach is, I mean, in the analysis of if in natural languages, is that if is semantically identical with material implication in logic, so the minimal semantics of if. But alternatively, there is just a view that natural language if encodes some non-truth functional relation between antecedent and consequent that is generally seen as causal or consequential. So both accounts can deal with many conditionals which convey a non-truth functional relation. The difference is whether this relation is interpreted as pragmatically derived or semantically encoded. The position advocated by relevant theorists is that the material implication semantics should be adopted with the causal and consequential overtones dealt with pragmatically via enrichment of the proposition expressed. There are problematic conditionals, so there are conditionals that seem to present problems for the truth functional account, that is material implication analysis as in logic, and relevant theorists claim that we should reanalyze these conditionals in terms of meta-representation. So again, meta-representation makes it possible to preserve a unitary truth functional account of if. This is the truth table for conditionals, and you can see that the whole conditional is true in all circumstances except where the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Let's have a look at the following example. If he dies, his son will inherit the castle. According to the truth table, only one possibility is ruled out. He dies, and his son does not inherit the castle. The additional meaning, his death causes his son's inheritance of the castle, is pragmatically determined, for instance, as a conversational implicature. This is the interpretation within the Gracian approach. Now, in semantic accounts, that type of meaning, that is some kind of causation or consequence, is claimed to be encoded. Thus, the adherents of the semantic approach propose the sufficiency hypothesis. P is a sufficient condition for Q. His death is a sufficient condition for his son to inherit the castle. Thus, if you analyze the sentence, if he dies, the butler has a son, you conclude that it sounds odd because the antecedent cannot normally be considered to be a sufficient condition for the truth of the consequent. So the previous example, if he dies, his son will inherit the castle, can be successfully accounted for in terms of the semantic approach. However, there are examples that cannot be explained, that cannot be interpreted in terms of the sufficiency hypothesis. For example, if you're hungry, there is a sandwich in the fridge. You cannot say that the antecedent, if you are hungry, is a sufficient condition for a sandwich to be in the fridge. If John went to the party, then he was trying to infuriate Miriam. Again, the sufficiency condition does not hold. So a cause-consequence analysis cannot be maintained. Thus, some modifications of this sufficiency hypothesis were introduced, and now all the conditionals were somehow divided into three categories, so three different domains. So the approach, the semantic approach, maintains the sufficiency hypothesis, but this sufficiency hypothesis operates within three different domains. So the first category are content conditionals. So content conditionals relate events or state of affairs. If he dies, his son will inherit the castle. So this is the first category, and obviously it works here. Now the second domain is epistemic domain, that is epistemic conditionals. The relation between the epistemic states, if I know, then I conclude. So if I know that John went to the party, I conclude that he was trying to infuriate Miriam. Okay? The knowledge causes the conclusion. My knowledge is then a sufficient condition for the conclusion. So it works this way. The third domain is constituted by speech acts conditionals. Speech acts conditionals indicate that the truth of the antecedent is a sufficient condition for a speech act involving the consequent. If I may say so, that's a crazy idea. The conditional is used to state an opinion only conditionally on the hearer's permission. If I haven't already asked you to do so, please sign the guest book before you go. If it is not rude to ask, what made you decide to leave IBM? If you are hungry, I inform you that there is a sandwich in the fridge. So mind you that your being hungry here is a sufficient condition for my informing you of the sandwich, for a speech act. So now, with the sufficiency hypothesis operating within three different domains, many conditional sentences can be successfully accounted for. However, again, there are some that cannot. And if you look at this utterance, if the sun rises in the east, I'm innocent. So this sentence may be used to emphasize the truth of the consequent by combining it with an antecedent which is obviously true. But it does not seem to fit into any of the above categories. The sun's rising in the east does not seem to be a sufficient condition for the speaker's innocence, for the speaker's conclusion that she is innocent, or for the assertion that she is innocent. Thus, we may say that the sufficiency hypothesis seems too strong. So the question arises what to do with all these problematic cases, and relevant theories propose to introduce the notion of meta-representation. And this notion of meta-representation can be identified in antecedents, in consequence, or in both parts. So let's start from meta-representation in antecedents. So antecedents are frequently used to meta-represent an attributed utterance or thought. Meta-representational antecedents used to represent the proposition expressed by a previous utterance are as follows. I loved her. If you loved her, why didn't you come to the party? So as you can see, if you loved her is a direct quotation of the previous utterance. So it is a meta-representation of an attributed utterance. Now we know that we can convert the material used metalinguistically into the material used descriptively in the process of enrichment. Okay? If you say you loved her, if you believe you loved her, why didn't you come to the party? This is a high-level explicature. Or alternatively, it is if you loved her, as you say, then only one word is meta-represented. So only the propositional form with a parenthetical as you say is meta-represented. But anyway, you can recognize this meta-representational element in the antecedent. Could you please have a look at this example? Seeing a road sign, roadworks ahead, delays possible, the driver says. If delays are possible, delays are necessary, which means this is how you interpret it. If they say that delays are possible, delays are necessary. So again, you convert the material used meta-representationally into something that is purely descriptive. Or, A writing in his notes, 2 and 1 is 4. B says, if 2 and 1 is 4, you need more homework, which means, this is how you interpret it. If you say, if you maintain, if you claim that 2 and 1 is 4, then you need more homework. If you look at the next example, mother raises a finger to her lip, indicating a baby's cot. Boy, if I have to be quiet, I will play outside. So, how we understand it, if you mean that I have to be quiet, I will go outside. So as you can see, what we can recognize in these antecedents are attributed utterances or attributed thoughts, unspoken thoughts. Some examples of metalinguistic use. I like tomatoes. If you like tomatoes, you must be from America. So again, you can easily recognize meta-representational use in the antecedent. His father kicked the bucket. If his father kicked the bucket, you don't seem to have respected him. Again, if his father kicked the bucket is the meta-representation of the attributed utterance. The wine bottle is half empty. If this bottle is half empty, you are a pessimist. Again, a meta-representation of a previous utterance. Now, it seems, apparently, that the truth table approach runs into problem with some meta-representational antecedents, such as 2 and 11 makes 30. If 2 and 11 makes 30, you need more work on mathematics. But mind you that in B, the antecedent is used to represent A's utterance, including its higher level explicature. So, if you say, or if you believe that 2 and 11 makes 30, then you need more work in mathematics. The truth conditions of the conditional utterance will be correctly assigned as long as this enrichment takes place. So first, we have to enrich the utterance. We have to construct, so to say, its explicature, and then we can use the truth table. I hope you remember the inferential process we followed in the interpretation of metalinguistic negation or in the interpretation of echoic questions. So this is just the same process. The relevant theoretic notion of meta-representation and pragmatic enrichment make it possible to assign truth conditions correctly to meta-representational antecedents using the regular truth table for if, as long as the fact that they are meta-represented can be represented via enrichment. So now we can use the same line of reasoning to consequence, that is, we can try to identify meta-representations in consequence. So here is the context. The doorbell is ringing. Mary to Jane. If it is John, I'm not here. So as you can see, I'm not here as a quotation of Jane's potential utterance. The consequence seems to meta-represent an utterance which the speaker wants the hearer to make in the situation described by the antecedent. It is a desirable utterance. So we can again use here the notion of interpretive use, if you remember it. It communicates that in the situation where the visitor is John, the speaker wants the hearer to tell him that she is not there. So it is a quotation of the potential utterance. Now, a similar example. If anyone talks to you about the treasure map, you don't know anything. You have never heard of it. Okay, so you don't know anything, you have never heard of it, are potential quotations. Okay, so this conveys to the hearer that if someone talks to him about the treasure map, he should say he does not know anything about it. So again, interpretive use is applied where the content of a desirable utterance is being meta-represented. So in the previous examples, we identified meta-representations of the content, and now we will provide examples of meta-representations of the form, that is purely metalinguistic uses. At a primary school, a teacher to a new student, if you come across me in school, "How are you, Miss Smith? Understand?" The consequent, that is, "How are you, Miss Smith?" directly quotes the utterance the student should make. Or the doorbell is ringing, Mary to Jane. If that's John, "Sorry, I'm afraid she's out." Again, the utterances meta-represented in consequence of this type are not restricted to those that the speaker wants the hearer to produce. The speaker may meta-represent a desirable utterance which she herself would like to make in the case that the antecedent is true. "If I don't see you before then, Merry Christmas." If you are the winner, congratulations. So the consequent meta-represents the utterance that the speaker would want to make in the case that the antecedent is true. So if indeed I do not see you later, I would like to wish you Merry Christmas. And if indeed you are the winner, then I would like to say congratulations. So now let us discuss some further examples of problematic conditional sentences which seem to be resistant to the truth functional account. However, again, if we apply the notion of meta-representation, they are perfectly interpretable. Son to mother who is going out. "Mum, don't worry. If I'm hungry, there is a sandwich in the fridge." So the consequent represents a thought that would be relevant to the speaker if the antecedent were true. "If he dies without a will, I'm his son, though not from his first marriage." Here again, the consequent meta-represents a desirable utterance or thought. So here we are back to speech act conditionals. If I haven't already asked you to do so, please sign the guest book before you go. So the speaker is meta-representing a direction which you would want to give if the condition stated in the antecedent is satisfied. Another example, if it is not rude to ask, what made you decide to leave IBM? So what made you decide to leave IBM? This is the consequent, and it meta-represents a question the speaker would like to ask if it was not rude. So all the above are meta-representations of desirable thoughts or desirable utterances. So what the speaker would like to say or would like to think under the condition that the antecedent is true. Let us have a look at metalinguistic conditionals. He trapped 2 mongoose, if that's how you make a plural of mongoose. He trapped 2 mongoose, if mongoose is the right form. So here the speaker meta-represents in a consequent a term that she would want to use if it is the right one. The rest of the consequent may be used descriptively. Mind you that in the example with Merry Christmas, the whole utterance was used meta-representationally. And one more example of the same time, grandma is feeling lousy, if I may put it that way, or grandma is feeling lousy if that's an appropriate expression. So again, grandma is feeling lousy is a meta-representation of an utterance that may be used only under the condition that it is the appropriate expression, so that the condition is true. So we've discussed the whole variety of conditional sentences, and now perhaps we can just sum up what we've said. A meta-representation can represent not only past or present utterances and thoughts, but also future or possible ones. It can deal with the cases where linguistic forms are meta-represented, or the content, obviously. It can explain how the consequent can have interrogative or imperative form. The consequent can have those forms because it is used to meta-represent another representation, an interrogative or imperative utterance, which is implicitly embedded under a speech act or propositional attitude verb. The consequence may be an imperative, while the whole conditional is analyzed as an assertion. It is analyzed as an assertion. You can see it after we have enriched it, okay? So I want you to tell him, go to hell, for instance. If it is John, go to hell, obviously in quotation marks. So it is interpreted. This is what is going on in our mind again. If this is John, I want you to tell him, go to hell. And then obviously it is an assertion, okay? But if there is no this enrichment, it is just merely an imperative, go to hell. As it is used to meta-represent another representation, the proposition literally expressed by the consequent is given a guarantee not of truthfulness but of faithfulness. This explains why the consequents in these conditionals do not have a regular truth-functional relation with their antecedents, which describe the state of affairs in the world. If you are thirsty, there is beer in the fridge. But mind you that there is beer in the fridge must be enriched, so that it is clear that it is used meta-representationally. This is going to be a digression before we are back to meta-representational consequence and the truth conditions of meta-representational consequence. I hope you remember that declarative and non-declarative sentences share a propositional form, a propositional content. So John will go to school, will John go to school, and go to school, addressed to John, have the same propositional content. The difference between these forms is in the higher level explicature, that is the intention of the speaker, whether it is the act of saying that, whether it is the act of asking, or whether it is the act of telling to. The speech acts of saying, asking, and telling to differ in terms of the propositional attitude. So, in the act of saying, the speaker is presenting P as a description of the state of affairs. In the speech act of asking, she is presenting P as an interpretation of a desirable thought. And in the case of telling, she is presenting P as a true description of a desirable state of affairs. So this is how these three sentences mentioned before differ. So now we are back to meta-representational consequence and their truth conditions. By the same token, conditionals with declarative, interrogative, or imperative consequence should be seen as having the same propositional forms, regardless of the different speech acts they may perform. The truth-functional relation should hold at the level of proposition. If that's John, I'm not here. The fact that something is meta-represented should be included in the propositional form. If that's John, you tell him, I'm not here. The antecedent and the consequent have a regular truth-functional relation as predicted by the truth table for material implication. Mind you that what appears in the brackets is just the enrichment, the conversion of the material used meta-representationally into the material used descriptively. So the same process we performed in the case of metalinguistic negation. These enrichments, that is, these conversions may be more or less complex. If that's John, you tell him, I'm not here. So the hearer is tacitly requested to make true a conditional of the form. If that's John, you tell him that I'm not here. Now, if you look at the next example, if that's John, are you here? So here there are two layers of meta-representation, one for interrogatives and one for attributed speech. It is tacitly requested. The following would be relevant, would be a relevant thought if true. If that's John, you want me to tell him you are not here. So mind you that what is italicized here are these complex enrichments that we actually derive in our minds. This is the inferential process. This is how we interpret the sentence, if that's John, are you here? So do you want me to tell him that you are not here? Or what do you want me to tell him? So this is, we may say that this explicature or this enrichment, because we are now talking about the enrichment in particular, that this enrichment represents what is going on in our mind. So in the next example, the following would be a relevant thought if true. If that's John, I tell him you're not here. I want to know whether you want me to make it true that if that's John, I tell him you're not here. Now, even if you find it a bit confusing, don't get discouraged, because it is just the inferential process taking place in your mind is here presented in a more technical way. It is just put down in a more academic terms, and it seems complex, but the intention is just to reconstruct the mental inferential process that is taking place in your mind when you are when you face a sentence like, is that John? If that's John, I'm here. And now I would like to draw your attention to some ambiguous cases, because sometimes a consequent may be ambiguous between descriptive and meta-representational. Look at this. If you're available, our meeting will be in Hillary term. So it can be treated as a purely descriptive conditional. So it goes like that. We will meet in Hillary term on condition that you are able to come and speak to us. If you cannot, then there will be no meeting. So the consequent is used to describe a state of affairs. But mind you that there is also a different, there might be different interpretation, and in that case the consequent is used meta-representationally and not descriptively. If you're available, we would want to let you know that our next meeting will be in Hillary term, which means that the meeting will be held in Hillary term, and you may want to come, but you do not have to. So if you're available, if you have time, then you can come, but the meeting does not depend on your being available. So the meaning is different here than in the previous one, because in the previous one the meeting depended very much on your being able to come. If you cannot come, there will be no meeting. Here, the meeting will be anyway, whether you can come or cannot come. So mind you that the consequent here is used to meta-represent information that would be relevant to the hearer if the antecedent were true. So it is a different kind of conditional sentence. Finally, we can discuss conditional sentences in which meta-representation can be identified both in an antecedent and in a consequent. So, mind you, a travel agent says Mexico is beautiful, and customer replies, if Mexico City is beautiful, do they have a room? So, mind you that there are two propositions, Mexico City is beautiful and they have a room, but they are not put forward as truth functionally related. The antecedent, if Mexico City is beautiful, meta represents something like, if you say that Mexico City is beautiful, if Mexico City is beautiful as you say, this is how we understand it. And the consequent meta represents an utterance the customer wants to make in the case the antecedent is uttered or entertained. So if you say that Mexico City is beautiful, I want to ask, do they have a room? Okay, so both clauses are interpretively used. Here are examples in which you can identify metalinguistic use in both clauses. I like tomatoes. If you like tomatoes, I like tomatoes. If you say you like tomatoes, I say I like tomatoes. All right, so here, as you can see, this is the explicature of that sentence, this enrichment. If you like what you call tomatoes, I like what I call tomatoes. So now, the above sentences can be truth functionally analyzed in the regular way. Because as you can see, the material used metalinguistically has been converted into the material used descriptively. If you like what you call tomatoes, or if you say you like tomatoes, I say I like tomatoes. I like what I call tomatoes. One more interesting example that is counterfactual conditional. Pope to a telephone operator in a small Swiss village. I'm Pope, operator. If you're Pope, I'm the Empress of China. The antecedent, so if you're Pope, is used to represent the hearer's utterance, and the consequent is used to represent an utterance that the speaker wants to make in the case where the proposition expressed by the antecedent is uttered or is entertained. So again, you can easily enrich it. So if you are saying that you are Pope, then I am saying that I'm the Empress of China. So this is how we understand the sentence, and it makes perfect sense. That kind of interpretation, that is a recognition of meta-representation in both the antecedent and the consequent, makes it possible to use a unitary account, to propose a unitary account of counterfactual conditionals, as the one above, and corresponding non-conditionals. So I'm the Pope, and I'm the Empress of China. So I'm the Empress of China is obviously again a meta-representation. So how we understand it, so if you are claiming that you're the Pope, if you're saying that you're Pope, then I'm claiming that I'm the Empress of China. So this is an abstract echo, or abstract echoes. What is being echoed is the property of being patently false. And finally, a metaphorical conditional. If the cité is the heart of Paris, the Latin quarter is its soul. So again, mind you that the antecedent represents the thought or the utterance, potential thought that many people may share, or the utterance that many people may produce. And the cité in Paris is the heart of the capital of France. So actually, how we understand this sentence, if we really think, or if we really say that, if we really claim that the cité is the heart of Paris, then we have to conclude, right, that the Latin quarter is itself. So the consequent represents a thought or an utterance which the speaker wants to make in the case the antecedent is uttered. We should say, we should think, we should conclude that the Latin quarter is its soul. So it seems that the notion of meta-representation makes it possible to account for numerous conditional sentences of various nature, and still we can preserve the minimal semantics of the logical operator and account for these additional meanings pragmatically in terms of meta-representational use. Thank you for your attention.